Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 6th City Council meeting. Please rise. Oh, I'm sorry, roll call. I always forget that.
Councilmember Ison.
Here.
Councilmember Kowalczyk.
Here.
Vice Mayor Rohrbeck.
Here.
Mayor Penrose.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I don't believe we have any proclamations or presentations this evening. I do have some announcements of community activities. We are starting a new forum for our annual council retreat. Normally we had it for one day during the week, and we've decided to open it up and have 3 what we're calling listening sessions open to the public to get input from the public directly on what they'd like to see happen. So it will be largely, it'll be a 2-hour meeting on March the 10th, which is a Saturday at the Ted Alcock right here, from 10 to 12 in the morning, and then on the 11th, Sunday, we'll have it from 10 to 12. It'll be at the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center next to the Sheriff's Substation. On March the 15th, we'll have a third one going from 5 to 7 p.m. at Kenyatta Cove Community Center. We're going to have to arrange some way to have people park there. Right now, there's a problem with them not having enough parking spots, but we'll figure that out. Excuse me, David.
Mayor, we have secured parking off of the highway, and so we'll have that on our website, and we'll offer shuttle service to the Kenyatta Cove Community Center from that parking lot.
Excellent. So that's your opportunity to come, and whatever you want to talk about is what the agenda is. There's no agenda on the part of City Council. It's the public's agenda. We'll follow that up with another meeting where the City Council in public will come up with a strategic plan, hopefully based on what the public has told us that they'd like us to do. Okay, that's that. On the 21st of March, Republic Services is going to have an informational meeting at the New Leaf Community Center for businesses. Ham radio class, April the 7th and 8th, for anybody who's interested in learning how to operate a ham radio. That'll be at the Firehouse, and if you're interested in that, just email me at dpenrose@hmbcity.com, and I can get you any information that you might want on that. On March the 22nd, from 4:30 to 6:30, there'll be an open house at the district's offices, the county district offices, 1528 El Camino Real, with Jerry Hill and Kevin Mullen, which ought to be pretty interesting. And then a reminder that tickets are now for sale for our annual Farm Day Luncheon. That's going to be held on March the 30th, and you can get tickets at brownpapertickets.com. And my last item is the Oddfellows are having ballroom dancing on March the 10th at 7:30. It's free admission, and proceeds for any donations will go to their scholarship fund. Okay, end of my announcements. There is nothing to report out from our closed sessions, so we'll go to our city manager, David Bosch, for updates.
No updates this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Boy, this is going to be a quick one. Public forum. Right now we have 2 speakers for public forum. The first person will be Ann Martin, followed by Tom Pohl.
It's not, now it is. Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. Happy New Year. I'd like to address the proposed cannabis ordinance. At the November 21st City Council meeting, as a result of a huge outpouring of public outcry, the council, you all voted to hire a consultant, which I understand has been done to study the impact of this industry on our town, and do a survey of coast-side voters, and you also requested staff to prepare the nursery ordinance. I've had the opportunity to review that ordinance, and as a result of my review, I'm urging council to continue the moratorium on all marijuana commercial activity, Thank you. I urge the continuation of the moratorium on all commercial marijuana activity until the matter can be brought before the public in a November ballot. I have several reasons for this. First is the ordinance itself. It basically allows unlimited licenses, no protection against agricultural displacement, and would basically allow virtually every greenhouse in Half Moon Bay to be converted to a marijuana nursery, making marijuana a major industry in our town. This will significantly change our culture. Moreover, the nurseries only need to be set back 200 feet from residential neighborhoods, which allows pot farms to be inserted right in the heart of residential neighborhoods in Frenchman's Creek and our neighborhood of Miramar. While the idea of allowing little baby seedlings to be grown at first appears a reasonable compromise, it allows an aggressive, well-funded industry to get a foothold in Half Moon Bay, and you can rest assured they will be pushing for more and more to be allowed to expand their activities to grow, process, and sell the mature plants. The body of evidence shows significant public health and safety threats posed by this industry. And when I leave this podium, I'm going to offer a copy of a 5-year checkup on the legalization of marijuana in Colorado that was prepared by the Marijuana Accountability Coalition, just released 2 weeks ago. There's a copy for every council member and a copy for the record. By allowing marijuana grows of any kind in our residential communities, the city is going to expose residents, especially our kids, to a crop that has adverse public health consequences, undermines the children's intelligence, and could negatively impact our coastal environment. Sending a message to youth that marijuana is just like any other crop, normalizing the drug and making it even more likely they will experiment with it. For the future of our youth, our town, and our quality of life, please extend the moratorium on all commercialized marijuana activities and put this issue on a November ballot for the people to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Tom Pohl.
Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I'm Tom Pohl. I live on 675 Spindrift Way. I would like to address the council on the restrictions being discussed in the February 6th meeting regarding smoking on the outside property of single-family residences. In that meeting, several members of the council suggested restricting smoking in the outside areas of these residences. Even though I don't use tobacco, I strongly disagree with these restrictions. Outdoor smoking at private residences is likely to be because of children in the house. Pushing the smokers inside the residence or their cars will expose more children in the residence to cigarette smoke and at higher concentrations. I would rather have the smokers outside. Many smoking awareness sites ask smokers to smoke outside away from their children. Researching the secondhand smoke issue, I saw most secondhand smoke studies online refer to indoor smoke. Those studies describe outside effects that do describe outside effects use measurements from 2 feet away. One Stanford study barely registered some outdoor tobacco smoke detections at 3 to 4 meters away and only had one slight reading at 8 meters in an area walled off on 2 sides. Residences with smaller lots, but allow smoking in larger lots. This does not allow for equal enforcement throughout the city. The search for backyard carcinogens can go beyond tobacco smoking. Smoke from barbecues contains polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are also carcinogens. I grill all the time, but because I accept the risk and I love grilled food. However, I could possibly expose my neighbors to these carcinogens. Should barbecues in backyards across Half Moon Bay be banned? I sure hope not. I could also make the same argument with fireplaces or fire pits. While the council ignores risks such as safely crossing Highway 1 or having a liquor store practically across the street from a middle school, I believe placing the outdoor restrictions on single-family residents without a firm science backing is ill-considered and overreaching. Thank you for your time.
I don't see anybody else for public forum. There is one member who, of the public who wants to pull item 1D from the consent calendar. Any other council members want to pull an item?
I want to pull 1G.
Okay, we're going to pull item 1C, 1D, and 1G. Can I have a motion to approve the remaining consent agenda items?
I move to approve consent agenda items 1A, 1B, 1E, and 1F.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we have any ordinances, public hearings? Resolutions and staff reports. Item 3A, Agreement for Design Services for Highway 1 Safety and Operational Improvements Project North.
Well, while we wait here, we'll get this resolved, but this is a great segue into introducing our new city engineer. So why don't you introduce yourself and
Thank you, John. My name is Maz Bozerginia. As John mentioned, the new city engineer. Very happy to be here. I've had quite a bit of experience in local government, working my way up from the Central Coast through my career, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm very excited. And thank you for having me.
Welcome to paradise.
Thank you.
And like all new staff here, he's been drinking water through the fire hose and doing an exceptionally good job at it. So he likes water.
I'd like to ask staff to look into the microphone problem. It's the third meeting in a row.
I do know that they were out, and it seems like every time we can do this without the presentation.
Sure.
Okay, good. The next one would be a little difficult without it.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, again, my name is Maz Bozerginia. Tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Highway 1 Safety and Operational Improvements North project. The request before council is to authorize the interim city manager to execute an agreement with Mark Thomas and Company to complete the peer project engineering evaluation report approval process with Caltrans for the Highway 1 North project. A little background on the project and some of the changes. This item actually came to the City Council on April 18th of 2017, and there were some direction given to staff to move forward with the project. And you can see that highlighted in yellow on the PowerPoint. The discussion was to extend 2 northbound lanes to Grandview Boulevard. There was also a discussion to extend the multi-use path from Main Street to Spindrift Way. Those were the 2 main components that necessitated the additional review by Caltrans, and the reason for the request for tonight's meeting. A little background on the funding. In 2012, the city was awarded $3.5 million from the TA, the San Mateo County Transit Authority, for the Highway 1 North Safety and Operational Improvements Project. These funds cover the design and construction. These funds, however, will not be released until the pier is complete. Additionally, the Pacific Ridge subdivision will contribute approximately $3.6 million to the signalization and intersection improvements on Highway 1 North and Terrence Avenue. Here's some of the next steps. Where we are right now, we're still going through the Caltrans peer review process. We have an administrative draft that's getting ready for release for the environmental, and the coastal development permit will be following soon afterwards. Once we get through the peer process, then the funding from the TA will be available to us as we move forward.
Excuse me, can you explain what each of these acronyms means?
Absolutely. So the Caltrans peer is the engineering and evaluation report through Caltrans. That's their process for their oversight. The ISMND stands for the Initial Study Mitigated Negative Declaration, which is what we're moving forward on with the CEQA review. And then the CDP stands for Coastal Development Permit. The funding agreement is with the San Mateo County Transit Authority. PS&E stands for Plans, Specifications, and Estimates, the design package and what we take out to bid for projects. I think that's it. So the recent activities: on August 30th of 17, there was a community meeting held to go over the review with the community. This was an event that was directed to the community. They were given direct emails and hand-delivered notifications about this meeting to the neighborhoods nearby. On the 19th of September in 2017, the City Council authorized staff to proceed with the project and the pier. On the 5th of December in 2017, the letters of credit for Pacific Ridge subdivision were called. January of 2018, the environmental review and the document preparation had commenced. And on the 20th of 2018, in February, Caltrans provided additional final comments regarding the modified traffic studies for the pier. So before you tonight, the recommendation is to allow the interim city manager to move forward with the budget amendment and the new contract for Mark Thomas in order to complete the Caltrans review process, so we can move forward with the environmental and the rest of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm wondering if we should have public comment first, and then we can go to council. Paulette Ison. No, I'm sorry, I apologize. Jerry Steinberg.
Jerry Steinberg, 591 Terrace Avenue, Half Moon Bay. For this project, Half Moon Bay City has now called in from Alianto Properties, as you've heard, a total of $3,269,000. Combining this with the San Mateo Transit Authority grant of $3,500,000, the city would have a total of $6.8 million for this project. But the cost is over $3 million, Caltrans' limit for a project engineering review, or a PEER. It would call for a Caltrans project review with a full EIR. That would allow for a full review of changes that would enhance the proposed placing of a four-way signal on Highway 1. Our contract city engineer had publicly indicated, this was the contract engineer, not the engineer now, indicated that at an earlier council meeting, he indicated that to use a peer review, it was necessary to break up the original cost of the total project into a south and north project. That's why we got $3.5 million for each. The project review EIR would allow for resolution of multiple traffic issues. Some of the issues would include previously studied back door to the high school at the top of Highland Avenue through proposed 1.9-acre park, which the city has not accepted to date. Presently, it is to remain open space maintained by the Pacific Ridge Homeowners Association, and will be their liability responsibility. The EIR will also clarify issues brought up by Silver Avenue resident on storm drainage issues on Silver and right turn access issues on Silver if the street is modified within the not fully used existing right-of-way. In addition, it would also review old traffic study for required Caltrans traffic signal warrants, including traffic from the frontage road on the west side of Highway 1. It would review ingress and egress and wetland issues from the city-owned Beechwood property on Highway 1, including if it's not really developed, but if it's used as a park. Finally, you would look at the present efforts to develop the property on the corner of North Main Street and Highway 1, the Podesta property, and its effect on traffic in the area. Full disclosure and transparency of the issues will ensure that the project will be best accomplished and prevent loss of grant monies, as has happened on another city project recently. We lost $500,000 on the Bridge Highway improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Back to council. Adam, you had a question.
So my understanding on this one, I just want to just correct me if I'm wrong. The contract, I don't understand, like the contract expired at the end of the year with them, but the review was done on the project and extra work needed to be done to get to the 30%, is my understanding. I don't understand how, so that part makes sense that we have to spend $19,000 for that extra bit to get to the 30%. Why does the contract expiring matter? Or what's that component of it?
Purely, when we enter into contracts, we place an expiration date on those contracts. We placed an expiration date of December 31, 2017 on this contract, and we did not extend it prior to that expiration. So that's why we're at this point. That was completely an error in our bookkeeping.
Congressman Rohrabaugh. Congressman.
Not yet, not yet.
He's on his way.
Thank you, Mayor.
President to you.
I lost my train of thought. I heard you mention that the 4-laning would go up to Grandview. I just wanted to clarify. The 4-laning will end before Grandview is what the direction from council had been. Is that correct?
Completely correct. That's what
Okay.
the council directed, and that's what the plans show.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. And lastly, the staff report says that the design work that we're being asked to approve was unanticipated. It makes me nervous. I wish we didn't keep having unanticipated extra expenses. I'm going to vote for it, but this is just a warning that we really need to keep an eye on expenses and anticipate, not unanticipate. That's all.
Mr. Dowdy.
The challenge that we're having is that, and we spoke to this on several occasions, is that we have been through now at least 3 project managers at Caltrans, and we're working, I think, on a 4th. And every time a new project manager comes in at Caltrans District 4, they want to reinvent the project and their conditions and requirements and the review. And so this is the challenge. And so from an unanticipated, and maybe that was the incorrect, because I anticipated fully that we would have a new set of comments from a new project manager. So I guess that was perhaps maybe Pollyannish of me to think that it was unanticipated. But we've been through this again about 4 different times and 4 sets of questions. And literally at one point, one of the questions we got was, what kind of grass seed are you going to use on the slopes to revegetate? And we're trying to get to a very high-level review process and approvals so we can get to that point to understand what type of grass seed we're going to put on these. So I apologize. I wish we were able to deal with it. From that perspective, the unanticipated is, again, changeover and new conditions and questions being brought forward. So thank you for putting up with my talking to that issue.
Thank you for the clarification.
Councilmember Kowalczyk.
I'm just a council member. John, are we going to use a single type of grass seed or a blend of various grass seeds on the slopes?
Blend, of course, and obviously drought tolerant as
Will
well.
it be a standard fescue seed? Okay.
Organic.
Just so a simple question here. So it's 19,500. This is incremental, or is this the total fee for services for 30% design?
This is the increment that gets us through to the point of the 30% design and what we believe to be the last comments and answers to the peer.
Understood. And do we have a ballpark anticipated budget for the project? I know we have budget, but do we have a cost?
Well, no.
Okay.
I mean, we do and we don't, but the answer is until we actually get to the point of the PS&E, the actual engineering design, we really have to get to that point. But what we know is we have about a little over $6 million in construction related costs, and we'll have to make the project work.
Thank you. If the mayor doesn't have any comments, I'll make a motion. Otherwise,
Just one comment. What is the next step after, directly after the 30% design, if it's resolved tonight?
In the slide, once we have the 30% design, that will get us to the peer approval from Caltrans. At that point, then we can proceed with finalizing the environmental document, as well as scheduling and putting this forward to the Planning Commission for the coastal development permit. So all of that sort of falls in roughly in order, in serial order, once the peer and the 30% design is done at that point. And let me just say, it says ISMND. If in fact which means initial study and mitigated negative declaration, we are doing a full assessment and delineation on wetlands. We'll be looking at a much broader environmental assessment of this than we might normally do. A lot of work has already been done on this over the years. So we believe that that's going to be adequate. However, if the the initial study, comes out and says ultimately that they believe, and we believe, that there are unmitigatable impacts, then we will have to proceed to perhaps a focused EIR, environmental impact report, or a full EIR, and we'll evaluate that at that time. And so these schedules are all dependent upon that determination, that assessment, and the comfort level ultimately of where we are, where the Planning Commission falls in terms of the environmental document. So all of this could be roughly a year out and an additional money away from reality and being able to get to the point of going to engineering. We hope that's not the case, but that's a reality of where we sit. And Jerry's comments are considered in that.
Thank you. Councilmember Kowalczyk.
I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the interim city manager to execute a professional services agreement with Mark Thomas and Company Incorporated for design services in the amount of $19,500 for completion of the 30% design and permit engineering evaluation report for the Highway 1 Traffic Safety and Operational Improvement Project North, CIP Project 538.
That was long. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll move on to item 3B, pavement management and complete street study session number 1.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Mosbos Virginia again. So this one's a little bit of a longer presentation, and I'm going to go through it, and feel free to, it's more of a study session, so if you have any questions.
So let me just sort of give a preface to this, and then I'll turn it over to Maz. We, over the last couple of years, as we've dealt with, and you've dealt with along with us, the capital improvements program have been challenged with the issue of many things, and one of those being, how do we address, how do we address the needs and the long-term needs and plan for the long-term addressing basically the streets and pavement management. The council over the last several years, has committed millions of dollars to bring the streets up to a very acceptable standard, shall we say, and we'll talk to that about pavement condition index. But there are streets that remain that need to be fully reconstructed. There are streets that will, over the next several years, become needed to be addressed under that. And we've also established within your policy and the city's policy, and basically in line with the state's policies, complete streets. And that's why we're here tonight, to set up the conversation. And so we've set this up as a two-session agenda item. One, tonight we'll be basically talking about pavement management, where we are, where we've come from, and how do we proceed, and sort of at least setting up the complete streets conversation about what it means and how it sort of relates to projects that we have in stream right now for review. The second study session will come probably in April, given the workload that you're dealing with in the coming month, and that we would then talk more about deferred completion agreements, about assessment districts potentially, and other funding mechanisms that are available to us, and sort of start to put together some priorities and also policy direction regarding how do we use the complete streets in relation to smaller streets, the residential streets versus the larger streets versus kind of the whole package of where we're going. So with that, I just wanted to give a little preface as to why we're here, what we're dealing with, and sort of come from there. What I do anticipate is prior to the session 2, we will meet with both the mobility subcommittee as well as the finance subcommittee to help work on some of the policy direction, perhaps within those committees, and to also talk about the funding, and so we can have that at a more depth discussion, and hopefully make the study session a little easier for everybody to work through, and the community ultimately to work through. So with that, Maz, thank you.
Thank you, John. So tonight I'm going to go over a little bit about pavement management and discussion about complete streets and how these two topics are interlinked. I really like this picture that we found courtesy of the Historic Society of Half Moon Bay. This is a picture of Main Street, and I believe right at Kelly.
That's Cunha's,
Yeah.
to the left there.
So thank you, the Historical Preservation Committee. So again, just briefly, tonight's study session really is more discussion about background. I'll go into a little bit about the Half Moon Bay's roadway network, the pavement maintenance and rehabilitation program, discussion about complete streets. We have a little case study example for the Magnolia Street, and then we'll talk about current projects. And then again, study session number 2, which will be sometime in April. We'll talk more about funding, prioritization, and next steps. So a little background on our roadway network. City of Half Moon Bay has about 27 miles of centerline miles. So the way that that's calculated is regardless of the number of lanes. So you may have 2 lanes, 1 lane, 3 lanes. We don't have 3 lanes here, but regardless of the number of lanes, that's how many centerline miles we have in the City of Half Moon Bay. That is responsibility of the city. Highway 1 is not part of this, as that's obviously part of the Caltrans network. So of the 27 miles, we have about 2.5 centerline miles of arterial roads. Although the City of Half Moon Bay was not designed with arterial roads in mind, we do have some streets that are classified as that, and there'll be more discussion about that as the circulation element comes forward in the future regarding reclassification. That's not the intent of tonight's meeting. But just a little background there. Collector roads are about 4.2 centerline miles, and the bulk of the roadway network is residential neighborhood streets at about 21 centerline miles. The other category is the parking lots. So that's part of the pavement network, so that's part of the calculation. So there's, Poplar's beach parking lot, some of the other parking lots that the city maintains. that comes up with the less than a quarter center line mile there. The total cost of reconstruction in 2016 dollars for the city's network is $54.5 million. So to put that in perspective, that's the largest monetary asset and liability the city has. To go in a little bit of the background before we move on to the next slide, as far as the classification, I want to talk a little bit about what each classification of road is. So an arterial road, that's generally provides a faster method of travel. And so they're usually designed with long distance travel in mind, and it's not as common as the other two classifications that we have. And again, the city was never designed around an arterial road concept, with the exception of Highway 1. For collector roads, those are the second most common classified roadway and are used as a connection between the arterials and the local residential roads. And they provide a balance between accessibility and mobility. So not as fast as an arterial, but more connections than an arterial. And of course, the local roads, which is the most common classification by far in Half Moon Bay, and typically in most communities. These roads are designed for the lowest and slowest speeds, provide the most amount of accessibility to homes and businesses and other areas. Of our network in 2016, that was the last time we did our pavement management study. We're going to be doing another one in 2019, so that'll be coming up, and we'll come back to the council with that update. Generally, we do it about every 2 to 3 years. Every jurisdiction is required to do that. The way this graph was out of that 2016 study by Ed Hara, and this pavement management system update graph shows the overall rating of our streets. And it's grouped in different ways. If you look at the center column, that's the best one for, where is it? Okay, perfect. This one is the way I calculated the previous graph. So the center line miles are what we were kind of looking at. But overall, this is just a graphic that shows the conditions of our roads. So the blue is very good. Good, basically close to new street. The green is a good rating, which is somewhere between. It's still still useful. You still have quite a bit of life left. This is probably the area you want to start doing some of the preventive maintenance, and so it's still in a good shape. Then we get to the poor and the very poor streets, the yellow and the red. Those are the ones that are above and beyond preventive maintenance and more into the reconstruction phase. City of Half Moon Bay's PCI rating was 65 in April 2016, and the Bay Area average of PCI was 66, so right in line with the Bay Area average. Over the last several years, the reason why that the city's PCI is 65 is over the last several years, the council and staff have moved forward with quite a bit of rehabilitation and preventive maintenance. Just a quick number, 23 of those 27 centerline miles were maintained over the last few years. That's what got us to the 65. This graphic is a little bit more about the pavement life cycle. So right in the beginning, so the bottom axis is in years, and the pavement condition is the vertical axis. So when a new street is built, you're pretty much, even a brand new street is usually not at 100. Pretty close, but even a brand new street, there's always going to be a little shy of the 100. As you can see here, over the first 10 to 15 years of the roadway life, it doesn't drop much. It stays pretty much in the good and fair. This point right here is the Bay Area average 66. So we're right just south of that. And this is where this graph is very informational. At this point here, where the quality of the roadway drops to 60 rating, for every $1 of renovation and preventive maintenance that occurs here, it will extend the life expectancy of the roadway section. And I have another graph that shows it a little bit better. But what's really important is after this 60 PCI rating, over the next 2.5 years, there's an extremely quick 40% drop in quality. And when you get to this point, now your $1 cost becomes a $5 cost. So you're looking at 5 times the amount of the cost to basically get the pavement close to the same condition that you would have if you did it 2.5 years earlier for 1/5 of the cost. But I have to mention, regardless of maintenance, all pavement eventually will require reconstruction. It will hold off, and it's cost effective to keep maintaining it. But at some point, every street's going to fail. That's just how, that's just the way that it is. So this graph, this one comes from the Federal Highway Administration. This was a really interesting reference document about towards sustainable pavement systems. So this is what I was kind of talking about here, is when you get to this point, when you do your preventive treatments, you can extend your life and kind of restart this depreciation curve in the quality of the roadway. And it's hard to see here, but the top of this green line represents the preventative treatment. It doesn't quite get back to where it was when it was first constructed. It never really quite gets back to that level. And each time you do another preventive maintenance, again, you get a nice little bump, but it doesn't get back to where the last maintenance was. That's kind of where you see that trend. So you should, if it's maintained properly, you see a less extreme trend in the drop in the pavement condition. So that's where it's really important. But again, this shows how it'll be a steady drop, but eventually it still will drop. As far as preventive maintenance, what does that mean? There's a few very common techniques that are used. Slurry seals, similar to this one. I think this was this on Main Street? No, this was one of the side streets, right? John?
I think, is that Filbert?
I think it might be Filbert.
What is that?
Mill Street? Thank you. So this is an example of a slurry seal. Then you have chip seals where you do it's similar. You put a slurry and then you have a small piece of aggregate. There's one other method here that I haven't listed, but a cape seal is basically a chip seal and a slurry seal together. You basically add your oil, your binding material, you add your small to fine aggregate, and then there's a final slurry seal on top of it, which is more for aesthetics. And then, of course, crack seals, which do quite a bit to maintain the pavement. This all aids in the preservation of pavement and its useful life. Some examples of reconstruction. These were the more recently reconstructed roadways, Ventura Street and Washington Boulevard. These are some of the streets that are programmed for reconstruction.
Why don't we go back one there, just briefly?
Sure.
So, Moz didn't have the pleasure of dealing with Ventura and Washington, but so from a reconstruction perspective, I think these are great streets. They look good. They're holding up. We went through a lot of challenges and issues to get to that point, but they're going to be there for the long haul. I think the important point to look at these and to talk about as we start to look at complete streets, and the reason why these are important, I asked for these to be put up, one, because it shows how good they can look once reconstruction's done. But beyond that is that neither of these streets were built and reconstructed with curb gutters, sidewalk. So they were built with basically the concrete swales next to them. That was a choice that was directed in part by the neighborhood and in part by budget and in part by, I think, the city not particularly looking at its own complete streets policy and making a decision about whether this was the right place or not to do that. I don't think it never really came up into the mix in the argument almost 4 years ago when this was all being laid out and dealt with. This is where kind of the next section, as we talk more about complete streets, comes in, is that these are great, they're wonderful, but they don't meet ADA, Americans with Disabilities compliance in terms of the sidewalk areas. They may as part of the street itself. There are concerns and issues right now with the neighborhood about, at least on Washington in particular, about drainage. These swales don't convey drainage as well as curb gutter does, and there's different issues and everything with that. So I just wanted to lay that out a little bit because it gives some preface to next steps and where we are in terms of looking at how we approach this maintenance and particularly reconstruction efforts. Thanks.
A quick factual question. So the difference, just roughly ballpark, for doing a reconstruction of this nature versus complete streets, what's the difference in cost between those two? Just roughly.
Well, you're probably looking at a 3 to 4 fold, 4 times difference between that as a rough, back of the envelope number.
Okay, so 400%. So there's an economic reason to look at. Okay, thank you.
There is.
Does that include design, or is that just construction?
Let's just call it construction, but design is incremental. You've got a design cost, you've got design
Yeah.
engineers, you've got everything in that. Whether it's sidewalk, curb and gutter, there's a little bit of work with that, but it's really in the construction cost is where you're looking at, is about a 400% difference.
Thank you, John. So after those recently reconstructed streets, these are a couple of examples of the next streets that are being programmed for reconstruction. On the top left, you have Seymour Street. You can see the alligator cracking, which is which means that there's base failure underneath. So it's not just the pavement section itself. The base and the sub-base have actually failed as well. Water has found its way into that location, which starts that process of what we call alligator cracking. And then and then you have the end of Church Street on the right. It's a little shadowy, but it's a similar situation. You can see the number of potholes and the type of cracking. And another major area which degrades the street section is actually utility cuts. Every time you do utility trenching, it actually depreciates the life of the pavement section quite a bit.
So one of the major kind of changes that we made when Ventura and Washington went in was to actually coordinate with CCWD to make sure they put in their utility work, their main lines in before we went and reconstructed the street. We also worked with the other utilities, and so that was something that we're moving forward with. I wanted to point out, because it's the new guy, he went out and found Seymour Street, was taking pictures. Seymour Street is not actually programmed in right now, but it will be given what we see out there and dealing with it. Church Street is programmed in to the streets maintenance and pavement management, but Seymour is not, just for disclosure purposes.
Those streets look like superhighways compared to Magnolia Street east of Highway 1. I have a constituent there who says Mexico streets are much better than what she has.
We'll get there. How
That's-
about we get there?
Yeah, that's part of the case study that's coming up very soon. So in talking about reconstruction and pavement maintenance, that goes towards quite a bit of the work, but but a lot of that's towards the vehicular improvements. There's also the other roadway network users, which are the pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders, and that is a good segue of how, when we're going from the discussion about pavement management to complete streets, and recognizing the character-defining impact of the street design that has on the neighborhoods, the multimodal elements of the streets, and the opportunity to address other safety and sustainability values through a street design. So what are complete streets? Complete streets are streets designed for everyone. They're designed and operated to enable safe access for all users: bicyclists, pedestrians, transit riders, motorists of all ages and capabilities. Complete streets make it easy and functional to cross the street, walk to shops, bike to work, allows buses to run more on time, and make it safer for people to walk to transit districts. Some of the components of complete streets, these are some of the more common ones. Obviously, we have sidewalks and bike lanes. In some situations, you have special bus lanes. A comfortable and accessible transit stop could be part of a complete street implementation. More frequent pedestrian crossing opportunities. And other, and usually design elements for pedestrian safety, such as median islands and curb extensions. And this is similar to this picture here. And the reason why I chose this one to share tonight was, usually in these situations, we also look at incorporating green infrastructure, stormwater treatment infrastructure. And so one common component of a curb extension is usually there's some landscaping and a green street component to it, green infrastructure component to it. So that's why it was important to share this picture, because typically we can incorporate this when we do a curb extension or a median island extension to reduce the amount of concrete and hardscape and treat the stormwater as part of that. What are the benefits of complete streets? Well, there are quite a bit. There's the connectivity component to it, connectivity to services, retail, public facilities, and other points of interest within neighborhoods. Through the improvement of safety, it looks to reduce accidents, improve public health through increased walking and biking. Generally, if you have the infrastructure in place, folks will be more inclined to utilizing it versus not walking on a shoulder or an unimproved shoulder. And there's also the capacity for, there's also the room for transportation network through greater travel of choice. Now we're talking a little bit about the policies. There's a 2013 circulation element that emphasized 3 themes: safety, multimodal mobility, and connectivity. There's the healthy community element, which promotes active transportation and further safe routes to school programs. And the draft circulation element in 2016, which is coming back for adoption, also expands on these policies. And I just wanted to note that the 2013 circulation element that was part of the general plan update was the first complete streets policy for the city of Half Moon Bay. Just also wanted to mention, also along with the healthy community element and the draft circulation plan, they're looking to institute a Vision Zero policy. And this Vision Zero policy is whereby safety for all modes are prioritized as part of the implementation of projects. At the same time, the city is also working on the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, which the draft was recently released. This plan assesses existing conditions, identifies potential needs for bike and peds in the system, prioritizes improvements, and defines areas for future more focused studies. As part of the bike and pedestrian master plan, there's the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which has been providing oversight and a forum for community engagement. And there was a meeting a couple weeks ago, and there'll be more coming up. Complete Streets implementation. And here's where here's where we talk a little bit about where we've been able to implement complete streets. So the main hubs, such as the downtown area, the Highway 1 corridor, those are the 2 areas that we've really looked at increasing the safety and enhancements that come with complete streets, looking to enhance networks to schools. So areas adjacent to schools is a good component. Same as the new library, for example. There's a new complete street safe route to school component that's coming into Correas and Purisima intersection. And then we have 2 projects on the horizon. First one is the Poplar Complete Street Project. That one was awarded a $1 million grant from MTC a few months back. And then there's also the Kelly Complete Street Project, which is on the horizon. It's an unfunded project at this time, but it's something that's coming up. And so the Complete Streets focus has really been more on the high volume areas with multimodal users.
Excuse me. One question, when you say downtown Half Moon Bay, are you talking about Main Street only, or are you including Parissima and Johnston?
The area, yeah, the Parissima and Johnston is part of the downtown.
Thanks.
And so the one area we haven't talked about is the local residential streets, and how does that play? Many of our local streets lack sidewalks, bike lanes, curb and gutter, and other stormwater treatment systems, unless you count the cracks in the road as part of that treatment system. Some of the constraints surrounding these local road implementations are, one, community desire. There can be the issue with community, compliance with ADA in some situations. And there's, in some cases, there's also right-of-way limitations where you have to reduce the pavement width in order to accommodate a sidewalk and curb and gutter, for example. Now we get to our case study for Magnolia Street. So here's the existing condition of Magnolia Street from Main to Highway 1, essentially, to the end of this section of Magnolia. So we on the left side, you can see there's quite a bit of drainage area concerns. You have different grades. You have no real path for the water to travel. It kind of migrates to the low points and eventually gets to these little drainage basins that we have that are connected with pipes underneath pavement sections. The condition of the pavement itself is also deteriorated. There have been numerous patches that have been done over the years, and at this point, there's really not much else we can do other than a total reconstruction of the street section. There's also discontinuous and varying design of sidewalks. This is one example here. You can see there's a section of sidewalk, and then it pretty much ends at this bush, and the discontinuing of the sidewalk continues all the way to Main from here.
The other side is
Yeah, and then
Parkway.
the other side has a parkway, and I think there might be some areas of, there's also some ADA concerns with the types of driveway approaches that are in this area too. So Magnolia is important because it's part of our current 2017-2018 Pavement Reconstruction project. And so the cost of the pavement reconstruction that we have currently is $150,000. Now, if we implement complete streets, and the way that we came up with this estimate was basically inclusion of sidewalk, curb, and gutter. There isn't really a...
done by the design engineer.
Done by the design engineer. They incorporated sidewalks, curb, and gutter, and that brought us to an estimate of about $600,000. So you can see the drastic difference in the cost when you start looking at implementation of sidewalks, curb, and gutter, and other complete street elements. As part of the discussion, it's also the desire, the nature, the characteristic of the street. Some of the residences and some of the neighborhoods, they have a unique character in Half Moon Bay. And so by implementing cookie cutter style of complete streets, it'll take away some of that character that each neighborhood has. These are just a few examples, and I apologize, they're really few and far between as far as examples, but we wanted to show some of the different ways that you can implement a complete street element. And one of the concepts that we've been throwing around is this concept of Cottage Street, where maybe you have a shared bike and pedestrian pathway, or you have narrow road lanes, where maybe you have a 20-foot right-of-way with parking on one side and sidewalk on the other. So these are some of the concepts that we're just kind of mulling over as far as what we can look at implementing in these areas, in these neighborhood areas. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but these are the current projects that we have on the CIP. Some of them are in construction, some of them are in design, and some of them are in the process. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of these. The 2017-18 Street Reconstruction Project, that project is at 95% design level. We hope to be going out to bid very soon in the next month or so. The ADA Transition Plan and Implementation Program, we are actually reviewing proposals as we speak, and we'll be coming back to the council with the recommendation on a contract to move forward with that. And the city parking lots and reconstruction project, that's another project that we actually have that's out to bid in the next couple of days. And so I won't go through this in great detail.
I'm going to hijack one, though. Main Street Bridge, we received the infamous E-76 from the feds, the federal government, so we have been now awarded the grant money for the first stage of design and environmental review. So just good news on that front.
So that brings us to next steps. So there's a few items that we're going to be coming back to the council to discuss in April. There's the deferred street improvement agreements discussion that has been ongoing for quite some time from what I understand. And at some point, that'll be part of the discussion in how and when we want to move forward with that discussion and start looking at bringing those to the table as a funding option. Of course, there's the other funding options that'll be part of the discussion, such as the transportation funds that we have on a routine basis, gas tax, registration fees, the general fund. There's grants that are out there and available through local, state, and federal programs, possibility of impact fees, development mitigation, and so on. And another discussion that we would like to have at that time is a prioritization of the complete streets implementation. That's really more about these neighborhood street implementation. And there's going to be some coordination with the LC, LUP, and the general plan updates that'll be needed. And that study session will be talking more about the policy discussion and the direction of council as we move forward in this process of navigating complete streets. That brings us to the end of the presentation.
Thank you. That was a very nice presentation, very complete. We have one public speaker before we take it back to council, and that's Mike Alfano.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council members. Thank you for being volunteers. I know you're not here for the money, so we appreciate it here in the community. My name is Mike Alfano. I live at 616 Magnolia Street. I've been a resident there for almost 20 years. This is a little bittersweet for me. First time I've spoke about this publicly here at a council meeting. There is one part that I'm going to miss if we can make something happen on our street. I live on the well-known Magnolia Street in your slides there. The one plus about having these giant potholes on our street is it does slow people down. So I have to add that, but I'm willing to give that up to have a safer street, in my opinion. So it got so bad this past summer going into winter that the Waze app showed a road hazard on our street from all the people cutting down Main Street to get, sitting in traffic on a 3-day hot summer weekend. So I thought that was pretty funny that right in front of my house was a Waze hazard that people were clicking on and agreeing that if they try to make a shortcut down my street, they should be careful of the potholes. So our street's unique. It's different than a lot of other streets here in town. We have a connector street at the end of Grove and at the end of Magnolia right in front of the Jehovah's Witness Church that allows a lot of large trucks and buses to make very convenient U-turns if they're trying to go back up Main Street or go back down Main Street. So what ends up happening for the residents is between the hours of 7 and 9 in the morning, if you're trying to drink a cup of coffee and you leave it on your kitchen table, you'll see it shake as the bus goes by. That's how heavy it is. The street's bad. We almost made it 2 years ago. We thought we were on the calendar to get our street paved, and apparently it was so bad they paved the streets next to us. So Grove got paved, Arleta Way got paved, Main Street got paved, and Seymour got paved, but we didn't. So I've been talking about this with almost a dozen different point people within City Hall to make this happen, and unfortunately I've been given a false promise that we're working on it. It's this year, it's next year, so welcome. Then PG&E came and really made it really bad. So now we have giant, what they think are repairs, and there are huge depressions in the street that aren't safe. So we have trip and hazard liabilities where people are crossing the street and falling down. My poor neighbor next door to me, when she wants to park in front of her house and get into her vehicle, because the pothole is so large right where she gets in her vehicle, she put a piece of plywood down. That plywood's been there for 3 months. That's important because that proves to me and to you that the street sweeper that I'm paying taxes on, that you're paying for, isn't sweeping our street. So I understand this is a workshop study session. There's not much that can come about it, but I beg that you think about maybe moving the street forward and working with some of our residents to make our street safe and really, I promise I'll take care of my sidewalk if you take care of our street. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Council, questions?
So, comment. So, Mike, thank you for your discussion. We've heard about this from previous generations. The council heard it again, and I just want to be really clear. A couple things happened. So we repave most of the streets or maintain them over the past number of years with the idea that, much like your presentation, it is better and cheaper to take your streets that are fair to good and keep them good than to take your horrible streets and make them good. It's just a big cost differential. But we made the commitment previously that Ventura Street and Washington Boulevard were so bad, we need to get those done. Magnolia Street needs to get done, and I just think we need to put it at the top of the list for when this comes up for consideration. And just, I think we're all nodding, but I just think we need to make that happen and move it forward when this comes up.
Okay, I have a couple questions. So I'm good with that, but so one of the things, currently, don't we make people who do like renovations on their home, maybe to a certain scale, we ask them to then underground the electric as part of the project? And if we do, is that the right thing to be doing? Because it sounds like it's tearing up the streets each time we do that, because I don't know if that's true. Give me perspective on that.
So when we talk about the utility trenching,
Yeah.
it's primarily related to CCWD work. It can be other utilities, can be our own sewer improvements, our collection system, but for the most part, we're really talking about CCWD water improvements going in and replacing water mains and dealing with that. They're normal activities. The gas project that PG&E has just been working on and continues to work on is a little unique, but it is also doing much of difficulty with that. The difference is that with the PG&E project, we were able to negotiate within our encroachment permit provisions for them to do major repair work and also to slurry seal in many cases to bring the road and streets up to where they at least were when they got there and started cutting. But for the most part, we're talking about really CCWD and to a lesser extent sometimes the city's own work, which is sewer. Now, the undergrounding, the answer is no. What we require is underground utilities from basically the pole to the house, but we do not require undergrounding of utilities from the undergrounding of the poles itself. So if you noticed on Poplar, one of Paul McGregor's houses, they had to relocate the pole over on one of the little houses there by, I think it's by First Street. But in any event, that's what we require with a new house. It's not to underground the entire poles, and that's many reasons behind that, but primarily it's about cost. The undergrounding is an extremely expensive proposition. So from that perspective, the trenching and the work's not from utility undergrounding that's occurring.
Okay, and then it sounds like we are in the process of figuring out kind of as we go through certain neighborhoods, Mr. Alifano's could be one of them, that we are talking about the possibility of grounding electric lines with the process or creating assessment districts as we go through the process to see if neighborhoods are interested in that. Because it seems to me that we should combine, if we're going to do roads and we're going to lift everything up, it's like, that's the obviously, so I think we should at least think about that. as part of the process every time we do a new road. I don't know if that's a possibility or not, but.
So I think you're hitting upon an important issue, which is part of, I think, the discussion about the prioritization, and I think this prioritization of streets, it's prioritization of the types of improvements that we're moving forward with as we proceed. I caution on the undergrounding. It's a great way to proceed if you're going to form benefit assessment districts, that you at least consider the inclusion of undergrounding utilities. Frankly, I believe that is the only way that we're going to ever underground electrical lines unless the California Public Utilities Commission changes entirely their program. We can't afford, as a public agency, to underground utilities. The Correa Street Underground Utility District is a small area, and that's $1 million when you kind of all package that out to underground the utilities in and around Cunha Intermediate School and the library. So it's an extremely expensive proposition. Now, if the community believes it's important, wants that, and believes the aesthetic value and the value inherently to that aesthetic is in their property values, then they'll support perhaps the benefit assessment district include that. And yes, that would be the least expensive time to go and do it. So we believe that the undergrounding of utilities should be at least a consideration as we look at, particularly in the formation of benefit assessment districts down the road.
So I may be incorrect on this one, but I thought that there is the ability for us to buy kind of like almost like in a 2-for-1 basis. There are certain towns that have already that have already got all their lines underneath the system, and they receive a certain amount of money from PG&E. I think we've discovered at least one of those towns where we're buying some of those credits from. To me, I would be interested in discovering any other towns along the way that maybe we can get that kind of a deal for, to be able to kind of expedite that process along. So just throwing that out there as well.
Okay, well, thank you for a very good presentation. We look forward to study session 2. Okay, back to consent items that have been pulled, and they are 1D, I believe is the first one, 1C. And who wanted to pull that? I did. Councilmember Kowalczyk.
So thank you. Just want to I have a question and would like clarification from staff, from city manager, that the wording of this seems extraordinarily broad. The enter into side letters, want to know what the boundary conditions are for entering into side letters. This wants to be explicit that it's limited to the positions under discussion, but as the recommendation is ruling, it just says authorize city manager to enter into side letters. And we've seen situations in the past, a previous SAM general manager left the authority with power to enter into side letters and changed agreements and gave funding and other things because there were not boundary conditions on it. And so I just want it to be clear, I want you to express what the boundary conditions are for entering into side letters. And it's not wide open, it is limited to a certain parameters, a certain topics, so please clarify that.
Oh, great, thank you. I didn't realize that was your understanding. Russell Brunson, Administrative Services Manager. In using this language, a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into side letters, it's these 2 specific side letters that are attached to the staff report. So it's only taking those positions that are mentioned in the staff report and adding them to the MOUs, no other authority. I don't think you'd want to give me that without any limitations.
Well, I trust you. It's just, so, okay, thank you. I wanted to make that point very clear, and I assumed we had the same understanding, and I know we had discussed it with the city manager, but I just want to make it abundantly clear and publicly clear. So with that, I move to approve consent agenda item 1C.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adam, are you voting?
Adam?
actually in the
You know why? It's because they're a different item on consent. Not attachments. There they are. Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we move to item 1D. And this was pulled by... Okay, yeah. Can we have, should we have public comment first, or? Why don't we have Paulette come up, please?
Okay, so, good evening, city council members and city staff. If I feel compelled to address this issue because of my own personal professional background in human resources and with major corporations. And I don't understand why this is on the consent calendar again 2 months later, worded basically the same way except for the last part, which has an implied threat by the employees that they will not do certain things if they don't get this new classification. This was turned down by the majority of the city council 2 months ago, and it was clear at that time that the past city manager was eager for this to go forward, but given that she was leaving her position, the council did not feel it was the right thing to do at that time. And my understanding was that there was a hope that the new interim city manager would have an opportunity to assess the organization of our city staff, to actually see what our staff is doing in their positions, to compare other organizations with similar sized cities, etc., and see what reorganization is needed here in Half Moon Bay to maximize the efficiency of our workforce. This is something that is not readily achieved in a month and a half on the job. Until that happens, I do not think that this is the time to change classifications, as it sets a precedent that is then later harder to reverse. So I really think this needs more time. This needs a much more assessment, because I'm not sure that our city is organized properly in terms of staffing. That's it.
Thank you, Paulette. Julia.
Good evening. I'm Julia Carter, the city's finance director, and I have a few slides on this subject, so if you allow me to just briefly go through them, just to give a little bit of background what we are dealing with. Okay. So, as Paulette mentioned, the item before you tonight is a reclass of 2 positions. It is a, oh, I'm sorry. Maybe it's still loading. I can see it on the screen, yeah. Okay.
Well, let me take the opportunity to address Ms. Ison's comments. So this was awaiting me when I arrived, and so I did my homework, looked at the analyses that have been prepared by both of the 2 firms, Management Partners and CPS HR. I found the information to be complete and compelling, and therefore I recommend that we make these reclassifications. And while I appreciate her comments about doing a fuller, more in-depth organizational assessment, clearly that's what I'm doing. But I felt like we were at a place now where we could bring these forward with a solid recommendation for your council's consideration.
All right. So In your packets, you have, you have a staff report and you have an attachment that indicates city's policy, how the compensation and classification is typically done. And the attachment 2, I believe, is showing the list of 19 cities which the agencies were previously negotiated by labor and approved by in 2000 by council. And this is the current practice that the city is exercising for all reclasses or salary compensations of any positions. One thing I want to indicate, in this attachment you can also see the population and the FTE count. The FTE count excludes public safety, just so you know it. And I also want to mention that the city council, the city currently has 4 union agreements. All of these agreements are pretty much on the same terms as far as the duration. They will expire at the end of this fiscal year, and this gives the council the opportunity to actually look at the policy, how you want to set the salary analysis or classification moving forward. But as far as currently, you kind of obligated to follow the city policy as it stands right now. And I also want to remind that during the duration of these agreements, the city reviewed, I believe, 8 classifications over the last 3 years during the MOU agreements, and 6 of them were, I have it on the slide, I'm sorry you don't see it, but we can pull it for the public at least, maybe. So 8 classifications, 6 of them were vacant at the time, which is typically the best way to look at the positions when they're vacant, so we can see and assess classifications to see if they match and address the needs of the organization, and if the compensation is adequate before we go to the expense of the recruitment. So that was done on 6 classifications across all unions. And 2 positions were filled at the time. Those were Community Development Director and Deputy City Manager, and those classifications and salary adjustments were approved back in 2015 and also covered by the existing MOUs. So what you see in front of you right now is really no different, because both classifications, both positions and both incumbents are working out of class and have been working out of class for extended period of time since these positions were filled, because one position actually reports to me. And just to see a distinction, so the position that is at hand, the senior accountant, is now being reclassed or requested to be reclassed to finance manager, and this position is actually leading the city audit, working with the consultants, working with the outside auditors, supervising employees, and none of this is in current classification. So we want to place people in the appropriate classifications and appropriate titles. And as far as compensation study, again, average of 19 cities, that's the current city policy. Again, you can change it if you want to, but that's what it is. And all the reclasses that were done before are no different than this.
Thank you. Councilmember Kowalczyk.
Yes, prior to Adam's bunch of things to say, just to want to express my point of view. So thank you very much, Yulia, for the presentation and the summary.
I'm sorry.
It's totally fine. Don't worry. We get it. We understand. We received the consultant report, and the city manager affirmed that. The public sector does not operate like the private sector, whereas I may find myself at my business sweeping the floors one day and meeting with an executive the next day. That's just the way it goes. But that is not the environment we're working in the public sector environment, and I firmly believe that our staff need to be paid for the work they do and the right classification of the work they do. And I want to thank them that when something pops up that is outside of the boundary, that they just get it done anyway. And if they're consistently getting it done anyway, and it is outside of their classification, then we should give them the classification and the compensation, just as we should give them all the tools they need to be successful. So this is something I will fully support. I just want to share my comments. Thank you.
Councilmember Ison.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I feel like, you know, everybody on the council wants to support staff. I mean, that goes without saying, right? Those are things I think we can agree upon. And fair pay for good jobs done makes perfect sense, too. In my world, we have exempt managers, we have non-exempt managers. You know, based on those classifications, you do the work that needs to be done at any given time. I do agree that the public sector is very different and pays very different as well. I'm glad to hear that you support this because that was something I didn't get to talk to you about earlier, so that does help me out from that perspective, gives me good understanding. When the consultant that was hired most recently to describe this was brought to council a couple months ago, and I explicitly asked a couple of pointed questions to the consultant. I don't know if you remember, but the consultant was not able to answer my questions, nor did he provide sufficient information to make me feel like he did a thorough enough job, nor does the attachment in here that shows anything with regards to FTEs per city size. What we want to talk about here is, are there cities of our size and scope that have similar positions in their organization? And when I did the research on it, I could not find it. When I talked to the consultant about it, he couldn't answer the question, nor had he done the correct research. So I don't think we can find that consultant's work at all viable in any way, shape, or form, just for the record. All right, I'm gonna get a little further into this. The other piece that we need to consider is Calpers, right? Every time there's salary increases involved, that means that that's what we're going to be paying in the future in terms of what we pay in terms of benefits out from the town. We need to be cognizant as a council, and I think, Rick, you're usually really good at this, at paying attention to how much we're spending, you know, because these are long-term costs that are going to be years and years in the making. Some of these people aren't that far from retirement. So every 1 year into this position, that's then the salary that you pay that person for the next years going on forever. Our job is to be cognizant of the dollars being spent up here. I see no information besides our new city manager letting us know that this is something that he approves of, letting me know that this is anything different from what we talked about before, and therefore I see no reason to support it because I've got no new information. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah.
So just related to your comment about the consultant's work, I remember you asking the questions and not being satisfied with the answers, but the idea of just because there was not a benchmark to comparable cities does not make their work void, because my understanding is we asked them to look at the work they're doing here and identify roles, responsibilities, and job categories for the work required here. And so I accept that at face value, and I accept that the interim city manager supports that, even though there aren't benchmarks for other cities. It doesn't make it void. Of course, it's great to have benchmarks. It's helpful to have benchmarks, but the absence of them doesn't void the work, in my opinion.
Did you approve of that consultant being hired?
I don't remember.
No.
I'd like to say something, and that is that I appreciate David's remarks. When this came before council a couple of months ago, I strongly objected to it, not because I didn't believe that the reclassification didn't have to happen or the salary increase didn't have to happen, but because I felt that our former city manager was trying to do something that we had asked her not to do before she left. We had said any new job classifications or salary increases or hires should be left up to our interim city manager to do. And that was my sole objection, and to this day, that objection no longer stands, and I am definitely for doing the reclassification. I think these people are wonderful workers. I take David at his word that he has been able to evaluate the situation, and he's for it, and so I'm for passing on this.
If I may add something else without the slides, it's a little difficult to do, but The fiscal impact of this action right now for the current fiscal year is about $8,500. As far as increases and the purse concerns, so nobody's, well, actually the new proposed salary ranges, and you can see it in your staff reports, there is a chart of how the salaries are going from current classification to the new ones, and you can see that senior accountant to finance manager actually overlap quite a bit. And all the administrative services director is a little higher than the administrative services manager. Nobody's getting an increase more than one step at a time. The city policy is at least 5%. So what it means that these individuals will be placed in step C and B, respectively. So you actually establish a long range of salary, new salary, and hopefully deal with retention as well here.
Yeah, with all due respect, that makes perfect sense. The fiscal year is up in almost no time whatsoever, so I find that to actually be a disingenuous comment, because we're talking about a fiscal year that's up in 2 months, so it doesn't really hold its weight, what you're saying. I think it's disingenuous.
No, you're right. Well, the reason I mention it, because I just want to remind that the council actually approved these classifications being effective July 1. So that's why it's important. So 8,500 versus the increase we actually put in the budget. So all of this will be salary savings for the year.
We approved the funding.
Exactly.
Because
yeah.
the
No, I
possibility
understand.
that we had to.
That's right.
So, I mean, let's be honest about.
Well,
Adam, I take offense to that. She's not being disingenuous. She's not being dishonest. That's harsh wording.
Right.
Do you mean disingenuous? That's unfair.
You're actually right. She's being completely honest. You're actually right. I just think it's a misframe of what we're
I
talking
don't
about.
agree with that either, but I think this is unkind, but it's fine.
Okay, can I have a motion, please?
I move to approve consent agenda item 1D.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
That's 3-1. Motion passes. Okay, with that, I will adjourn
Is
this
that
Thank
it?
you, Yulia.
No,
Thank you.
Are we done with everything?
1G. Okay.
Truck.
Yeah, we're almost there.
Truck.
Getting excited.
Yeah. Truck.
I don't know if you need to do a presentation per se.
We'd be happy to sit here and take any questions you
Yeah.
have.
Get straight to it. This one comes down to, so this all makes sense, right? The big question, what I couldn't understand in the staff report is the actual justification for the 350. I mean, this is a minor thing versus, let's just say, a 150. Like, I didn't understand why we need the 350 as opposed to the 150, and that's literally what I'm looking for out of here. Why? Why are we willing to spend the extra money? Because it's an extra $19,000 above what, and so I mean, as somebody who's trying to look at the budget all the time, yeah, well.
Well, typically, the F-150 is usually a smaller pickup in this industry, and it's usually utilized by a superintendent or a field supervisor in this case. Currently, we have 5 budgeted maintenance workers, and we only have 4 field service utility trucks. So with the addition of our 2 maintenance workers this past fiscal year, that put us to 5 workers to 4 service trucks. So we needed an additional service truck to manage that.
So let me get, the simple answer is the F-150 is a very light-duty truck. It's not designed for the type of equipment that we're putting in there, so it basically is an open bed truck. This 350 is the structure and the framework to be able to allow for the heavier boxes and the lift gate and all the things that we're adding to that point. So that's the difference.
Can we have a motion?
Anybody else? All right, well, then, in that case, I will recommend that we adopt a resolution authorizing the interim manager to execute purchase agreement with James Ford of Half Moon Bay to purchase a Ford 350 field service vehicle for the Public Works Maintenance Division.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting. See you in 2 weeks.